I do see another question here. I'm looking to start my ERGs with teams. So I was wondering if you have any tips for rolling out. Assuming that you're saying, and feel free to clarify, if you're saying that your ERGs right now don't have a communications channel outside of newsletters and you want to know best practices on how to get them set up into their first communications channel. Few tips on that. First thing, big congrats, because a communications channel is a game changer for an ERG. So that's already a huge win for your program, that you're moving into a communications channel, not just a newsletter. And my tips on how to roll out is actually correlated with what I'm going to say and why a communications channel is so important. There's three kind of directions of communications that exist within an ERG. The ERG leaders speaking to their members, so that one direction, that's very common within a newsletter, where that's just their way of communicating to members. The other method is ERG members communicating to ERG leaders. So that's method number two, ideally via feedback. So giving a method of feedback. Sometimes people might say, well, they could respond to our newsletter and give feedback. True. But also beyond that, ERG leaders, what am I trying to say? Whenever you have a communications channel, that happens a lot quicker. That feedback loop is happening quicker. But the most important that I would say when it comes to a community, when it comes to communication direction, is members to members, connecting members with other members. That does not exist within an ERG newsletter. And that is honestly one of the issues that I see with a lot of ERGs that are operating their communications just off of newsletter and email. So big congrats. But that being said, you need to keep that part in mind when it comes to how are we using this as a space to connect members with other members, not as a promo space where, again, ERG leaders are just talking at their members saying, hey, join our next event, etc. Oftentimes, this is a huge plague that I'm seeing within the ERG space, where a lot of ERG leaders are using their communications channel as a promo space. And then they say, we have low engagement. And I don't know why. When the answer is, you are just asking something from your members, where essentially you have to provide, what I like to say, 10 times as much value to your members than what you are asking from your members. Actually, I guess I can come off of screen here. So that being said, that's why I'm a really big fan of a communications plan when it comes to engaging folks within a channel, especially for starter ERGs that are just moving into this communications channel format. It is so important for them to just know in advance how they're going to engage their members, which again is saying, how are you going to provide value to your members? Value breaks down into really two aspects, education and entertainment. So when we're saying value, that's what we're talking about. Technically, a third form of value is the programming that they do, but I would say for a communications channel, I'm really saying that in the context of any activities that they host in their team space. Plan in advance what you want to happen in that communications channel as a thing one. As a thing two, I would say, in a similar way of what we're talking about with moving your channel from private to public, you also want to have guidelines set up in advance. So make it clear on what's appropriate versus what's not within this community. I would also align with your leads just in general on what to do if something traumatic happens that affects the community in any way. Because the thing with a communications channel is it's a lot easier for people to just post things without necessarily putting a lot of thought into it, without being the most politically correct, which is very important within the context of an ERG, which oftentimes means politically neutral. So therefore isolating some of their membership bases because they are emotionally responding. So I say all that to say, have a crisis communications plan. Help your leads to understand what's appropriate versus not appropriate when posting. Give some guide rails, ultimately. I've seen also a mistake. I personally consider this a mistake when it comes to ERGs, is sometimes I've seen them roll it out on teams and then say only ERG leaders can post. Members They can't post, they can only like comment on a post. That's something. Actually, Slack can do it too. I don't see it as common with Slack because I think a lot of organizations that use Slack have more of a understanding culture of like anyone can post and just know what to post, what not to post. I think in Teams, a lot more organizations that use Teams are a lot more cautious. So they try to over structure when again, community is what it comes down to. So if you're connecting members to members, limiting members' ability to post is oftentimes a sign that you don't trust your community. So I don't recommend that. I would, again, like I said, just lead with those guidelines of what's appropriate versus what's not appropriate in the space itself. Um, Beyond that, with Teams in particular, workflows is a little bit complicated, so I won't really touch on workflows like I would within Slack. But I will say, going back to the concept of your communications channel being that culture center, right? Where people, again, in like a college setting, they will go to their culture center. Let's use, for instance, like an LGBTQ culture center. They will go to this culture center because everywhere else on campus does not feel like a place where they could truly feel like themselves, truly just kind of like let their hair down and enjoy. So, nevertheless, in that same way, that's what your communications channel should feel like. But beyond just the fun things, the decor that make up a culture center, same thing with communications. Um, it's also the resourcefulness of it. Like, ideally, there is some sort of like bulletin board within a culture center that tells people what's happening. Ideally, there are maybe some books or like a regular, again, resource that's regularly provided, readily available for members when they go to this place where they can have, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example on the spot. I'm not that good at it. But, and yeah, anyway, I'm not that good at thinking of it on the spot. But in the context of an ERG, I say all that to say you want your ERG channel to serve as that same culture center where it's full of resources, evergreen resources, but also it's truly a space where, again, it's so about the community that is being supported that the people who identify with that community, this feels like a place where they can be themselves, even if it is, which it should be, an open space. I'll also just say a couple of best practices. Steer your ERG leaders away from at here or at channel. I'm not sure what the Teams equivalent of those are, but that's essentially how on Slack, how you can notify everyone who's in the channel. Um, Honestly, I like to say that those are for emergencies, and there's no emergency within the ERG space. Those are things that are almost directly going to correlate with low engagement, because people will mute your channels if you do that, which is understandably so. It gets very noisy when you do that. Beyond that, cross posting is another thing that I see that's overdone within ERG spaces. So when an ERG starts posting in every other ERG channel, hey, we have this starting now. Oftentimes, it's like a very desperate act that ERG leaders do just because they get like nervous that people aren't going to show up to their event. And I get it. I am guilty. I've done the same thing, but it is not a good member experience to spam other channels with that, especially when it's an event or a piece of programming that's not relevant to the community that you're posting it within. So something else I would advise for ERG leaders to kind of steer against, and also just in general to measure the success of your communications. So for instance, um, Teams, they don't have as good metrics as Viva Engage or as Slack, but they do have some things. So with Teams Analytics, I have developed a formula. I call it the channel index score. I don't think I say score, but channel index, where you are able to kind of calculate your engagement in Teams, essentially. So I will say pull your communications analytics on a regular cadence, especially starting from the jump since you're just about to roll it out. This way you can establish it as a good best practice from the beginning, just to see if what you're doing is working. Like, ERG leaders, they need this quick feedback cycle to know if something's working. So even if it's on a monthly cadence, to be able to look back and say, well, we tried to do like this month with our communications and our engagement went super high. So let's incorporate more of that creativity. Or maybe we tried this thing and it wasn't really a hit with our audience, and we can see it in the numbers. Establish that as a best practice from the jump, is regularly measuring your communications.